Welcome back.
Hey, buddy.
How's it going?
I'm doing fantastic. Do you trust me?
Do I trust you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Depends on what. I don't know if I trust you now that you asked me whether I trust you or not.
Well, I just made a statement. I asked if you trusted what I said.
Well, yeah. I mean,
We're week 2 of trust.
are we week 2
Or are
three?
we week 3?
I think we're week 3.
Nah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we are. Week 3. Wow, this is great.
See, that's how all the
flies.
kind listeners know we don't record all these like in one sitting and claim to be weeks. It's literally weeks apart.
Yeah, week to week. So we're talking about growing in trust, trusting others, right? So week 1 we talked about trusting God, and then we talked about last week we talked about
Being trustworthy.
and now we're talking about trusting others.
So we talked about earning trust, and now we're talking about becoming more trusting of others. We talked a little bit about that last week, but we'll go a little further in depth. Like talk about this morning. Like, do you have points in time or examples where you were just it was required that you trust someone else, or at least the opportunity to trust someone else was kind of needed? You had to be vulnerable enough to trust someone else. You couldn't do it on your own. You needed that trust.
I mean, there's a lot of benign examples, like if you like, I don't really know how to work on cars very well, so like if there's something going on, I call my father-in-law because he works on cars. So there's like this implicit trust there because he knows more than I do about cars, and so I generally trust what he says in that regard, you know. So there's like benign examples like that. I think maybe like a
like more
couple of
higher
the
stakes.
bigger examples. A really good example was when we had our first child.
Oh, back to kids again.
Yep. My wife was trying to have a natural birth or whatever, right? So she started pushing, and we found out later what had happened was the umbilical cord was in between the head and the canal.
Yep.
So every time that she pushed, the heart rate went down.
Yep.
Right? Okay. So, the doctor is like, stop pushing, And so they're like getting an ER room prepped and ready to go. And somebody was like, oh no, there's not one ready or whatever. And so like, the doctor's like, well, we're gonna have to do it here, like in the room or whatever. And I think in that moment, there's this trust that you have that person has that training. I mean, it's your kid's life in their hands. And so you just have that trust that whatever they're about to do is the best decision, right? And I think you can think about that for a lot of medical, big time medical decisions, right? So, if you end up getting diagnosed with cancer and they get you on a treatment plan, you have to have some really big trust that that's the way to go. And I know people that like always get a second opinion, always get a third opinion, always get a fifth opinion, and I don't think those people like have that implicit trust or whatever, So yeah, I would probably say that's probably a really good example of just in that moment, you're just like, you just tell me what to do. Go stand over there. Okay, I'm going to go stand over here. You know what I mean? Like, here. And she like threw these like, I don't know, whatever, the surgical gown at me and was like, put this on. And I'm like, what do I do now?
I'm in it.
I'm in it. What are we doing? What are we doing? So anyway, and it all turned out okay. She ended up, an actual surgical room opened up, and they called. So the doctor, like, she was this little tiny doctor too. She was probably like, I don't know, maybe like 5'2", maybe 110 pounds. This tiny, Dr. Ruffin. And she like jumps up on the bed while the nurses are pushing down the hall. And, it was a little wild and crazy time there for like 20 minutes. But it all turned out okay. How about you?
Yeah, I think the follow up question to this is: does that come easily to you or difficult to you? I actually think it's. I don't know. I wonder if I'm too trusting, or I'm just too trusting, or my threshold for, like, I haven't found myself in that situation you're describing. I think with would be extreme rarity. But like, so we're doing this project on Saturday. We're doing this mission project, and we're cleaning up weeds and shrubs and all this. And we have different tools, and we have these electric hedge trimmers. You have a pair, I have a pair.
Yep.
They're great.
Yep,
Electric
these things
hedge
are
trimmers.
awesome.
They're phenomenal. They saved the day. They took days worth of work down to a couple hours, right? And we're trimming up all these vines. And my friend Josh and I, who we've been friends for years, we work well together. We discovered one of the quickest ways to clean up these vines is one person would pull it, hold it back, the other person would run the trimmers by, right?
Yeah, definitely best way.
Right. Well, the trimmers are running by within inches,
less than a foot,
less than a foot of your fingers, which could easily remove your fingers.
Oh yeah.
But we weren't doing it. We weren't doing anything that was risky or unsafe because the environment we were operating within had been built on a relationship of trust. Like,
Yeah.
I trusted, respected, knew his ability to run the trimmer and to pay attention to what we're doing, along with he equally trusted my ability to understand. We had a shared understanding of the process that was going to work.
Yeah.
Right?
Like you wouldn't have done it with one of the kids there.
Correct.
Or maybe another adult that you didn't
That
have
I didn't, yeah.
really great relation. You would have held your hands further away.
Yeah.
And let them cut it in that case. Yeah.
So, stuff like that. I've held, you've been on like a construction site, like I'll hold a nail for somebody to get started, right? Like someone's swinging a hammer at your hand.
Yeah, not me.
Right. Well, people are extra cautious when someone else is holding a nail. So they don't even really, they get it started. They don't even really, are like whacking.
They're not really one hit whacking it in.
Right?
Yeah, like you would on your own. You tap, whack.
Yeah, I did one time, was holding a concrete spike with my boot one time, and I did get a glancing blow to the shin with a sledgehammer, which does not feel
I
good,
bet.
but it was a glancing blow.
Yeah.
So yeah, stuff like that. I think it's compounding. I think it's great for relationships. So I think it compounds. It rapidly increases the quality of the relationship. The more often and the more in depth you can trust someone, and show that you trust them.
I mean, definitely. One of those situations where if you don't trust the individual, then you're not as open to either sharing about yourself and communicating in such a way, right? So yeah, I mean that only can help relationships. I really look at it too. I think when you get married, when you finally find that person that you connect with, over that course of dating and courtship and stuff, what you're really doing is you're building that trust up. But even like when you decide to get married and you get married, like you're still not 100. To me, you're not 100% trusting. It's through the years of marriage too that you really start building up and building up and building up and building up, right? So you're kind of taking a little bit of a leap, even when you're dating somebody.
Every little bit,
be exclusive to whatever, right? And then even in that marriage, very rarely do you hear somebody that's like been married for 70 years and they're like, yep, that was the one, right? I knew it the moment I saw him, right? Like fully trusted him, like knew it was that, that's a rare occasion, right? Mm-hmm. So the rest of us peons have to, build up that relationship between the two of you, right? So I even think getting married, is an act of trusting that other person quite a bit.
Well, let's talk biblical stories.
I like biblical stories.
Let's talk about the Apostle Paul, who was Saul, and Saul here, in his conversion, met with Jesus. Jesus appears to him, has this life-changing experience on the road to Damascus, and he does a 180 from trying to stamp out followers of Jesus to being the biggest evangelizer for following Jesus.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And that all sounds, we know this, we know how that goes, but what I want to key in on is all the other people the Lord used in this, where he's blinded.
Paul is.
Yeah. And Ananias, the Lord calls Ananias to go heal Paul.
Mm-hmm.
So Ananias has to trust the Lord.
Yep.
To go and follow through on helping someone that is, in all sense of the word, has proven themselves untrustworthy to someone who's a follower of Jesus.
Yeah.
And they have to go. It's fascinating.
And then on top of it, that Ananias does heal him, and then brings him to a bunch of other followers
Farther into the circle.
the way, right, of Jesus, and everybody else around is like, this guy, you brought this guy to the party,
Yeah.
So there's a lot of trust in that.
A lot of trust that has to happen. A lot of trust that was built and rebuilt, which I think is a great redemptive story for all of us. I don't think any of us could be, what's the scripture where Paul says, we're all sinners and I'm the worst. I'm the worst. What's the verbiage on that? Do you have that?
Somewhere. Where is it? I am the worst. Where was that?
Well, anyway, I used to color code my notes. So
just so everybody knows, I did not print everything in color.
And I like our layman's term podcast because I don't have to have the direct quote. I know, in a nutshell, Paul says, we're all sinners, of which I am the worst.
Of which I am the worst. Only by the redemption. Something about only by the redemption of Christ, right?
So he knows he couldn't worse. How could he get any worse, right?
Yeah.
Well, so he's got nowhere to go but uphill, but he can go from the depths of untrustworthiness and re-earn it.
Yeah,
re-earn the trustworthiness.
1 Timothy 1:15-16. Here is a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. But for that very reason I was shown mercy, so that in me, the worst of sinners, Christ Jesus might display his immense patience as an example for those who would believe in him and receive eternal life.
Hallmark verse right there.
Yeah, I find it interesting, because I get what he's saying, but when he says of whom I am the worst, we kind of can sit here and go, yeah, he was pretty bad, right? But like, again, that's kind of our world, our society of trying to like, this person's worse than this person's better, or whatever, but all sin is equal, right? And
yeah,
and
like we've talked in the past about like,
so we're all
we don't
worst.
believe in this hierarchy of sin,
yeah,
because all sin separates us from God.
Right.
Any separation is equal to vast separation, because it only takes the same amount of salvation to redeem, no matter the distance of separation.
correct.
Which that salvation is, Jesus has done for us. We just have to accept it.
Yep.
So it's already been performed. We just have to accept that. So there isn't really this hierarchy of sin.
Yeah.
And and I think Paul, I wonder if in him saying this, that, of which he is the worst, he also comes out of a system that had hierarchy of sin.
Yeah. Right, because he was Jewish.
Because there
right.
was different sacrifices required for different levels of sinful nature. So he's just making it blatantly obvious that he fully accepts he is within the realm of maximum level of sin.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that he goes,
Which makes him
from,
relatable to anyone in the world ever.
Right.
That's what he's saying.
And that's like kind of my point is I actually relate to that, right? Because when I do something that's sinful, I think, man, I'm the worst, right? Like he's basically showing you that he's you or anyone else, right? Where what he was doing, he thought was just under the Jewish, law to stamp out these treasonous heretical
Hey-o.
people. And then he realizes from
Not clergy, real layman.
Yeah. Realizes that he's got it all wrong, right? And so he can look back and be like, God, I thought I was doing something right in the moment. It was incredibly wrong. Man, I'm the worst.
I am the worst. Right. And that makes, like you said, it's relatable because I think no one can do anything. And then no one is just a worldly human fallen sinner can read and learn about Paul and then say, yeah, but I did this, right? Like fill in the blank.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about too what's crazy about the story of Paul is it's on the two ends of the spectrum, right? We would look at him imprisoning and killing, I don't know how many hundreds of Christian followers, right? Early Christian followers. That's pretty bad in our society, to basically this transformation where, he's probably, if Paul didn't happen, we would not be here today, right? Probably the biggest disciple of
God's use
Jesus.
of the Apostle Paul was very strategic in the formation of.
And here's what's crazy: you're not going to be that end of the spectrum, and you're not going to be the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and I think that's what's so, to me, in a way, relatable but not relatable. Right, knowing that you can do wrong but come back from it. It's just your choice. It's your will. Right.
So here's one for you. Ready for a hot take? Ready for me to drill a hole deep into the brain of Keith?
Uh-oh. I'm ready.
Just last week, we're talking about the old say-do ratio.
Yeah.
We're talking about the trustworthiness, and we're talking about how once someone has lost your trust,
Yeah.
it's so hard.
Yeah.
Almost, dare I say, not to put words in your mouth, but you're just
it's pretty impossible.
You close the door, right?
Yeah. It would take God coming down and, like, I don't know, blinding me to, like.
Well, I'm not putting you as Paul. I'm putting you as these other disciples.
Oh yeah,
right?
There'd be no way. There'd
right?
be no way. God would have to talk to me. And
you would
like,
have to. You would have had to have been Ananias.
Yes, I would have had to.
Right? You couldn't have been the guys Ananias brought Paul to.
Seriously, if Paul walked in that house, I'd be like, this guy.
Yeah.
I don't know who these people are. I'm out of here. Yeah,
You're not going to throw down. You're just going to deny.
Yeah, probably.
I'm just here to wash feet, man.
I'm just bringing the snacks. I just brought the snacks. I thought we were having a good time. That's it. No, yeah, man. I think about sometimes. I think about. Okay, here's the difference. I think about the first followers of Jesus denying him while he is being tortured and crucified, right? And every now and then I think to myself, I wouldn't have denied him, right? Because like those disciples witnessed miracles, right? Like they witnessed the glory of Jesus, right? So you kind of be like, man, if that was me, I wouldn't do that. And then I realized I would totally do that, right? Because that self-preservation kicks in.
Oh, and even just
Right.
and even just like all the benefit of the doubt and the grace you have to give our first century original disciples, right? Like, can you imagine too, like probably like the little hamster wheel going around inside the skull there, like, thinking about things.
Yeah.
Like, to your point, witnessed all these miracles,
Did them. Like, felt the Holy Spirit, did miracles.
Yeah, but like watch Jesus do all sorts of amazing, amazing things, right?
And I don't know that guy.
Well, no, they're probably like, he's got this.
Oh yeah,
Right.
right. Oh, okay, yeah, I got you. He's like, ain't nothing I'm doing to help this
What
guy
am I
out. He can figure this thing out. Yeah. No, so yeah, I would probably bounce from that room real quick.
If somebody brought Paul in
Yeah.
or Saul at
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah, I would bounce hard. I will say this though, I think that of the people in my life that I have, you could say deuced out or bounced real hard from and stopped talking to, there is always a way back. It's just that it's improbable. It's not impossible,
Oh,
but
right.
it's improbable.
We've had that discussion before.
Right. So it's like you can, if our relationship gets to a point where something happens and it breaks all trust, coming back even years later and saying, man, I was completely wrong in that situation, and like asking for forgiveness, and I probably would, and then start allowing that relationship to, it wouldn't be the same, right? But to continue to grow. The problem is, we're all little sinful humans, and none of us will think that we're wrong in a situation, right? And nobody is probably 100% blameless either in a situation. So, I think that, if you and I got in a giant argument one day and we both said things that we shouldn't have said, I'll walk out of here going, that Mitch, he was all wrong in that situation, and I was righteous, and then you'd probably be like, this Keith guy,
This guy.
him. And I think that's the improbability of it, and the impossibility of it. And really that brings me to, a book, The Trusted Advisor, right?
Oh, yeah,
Talks
we talked
the
about
trust
this.
equation.
We talked about this in staff one time.
Yeah. Did we talk about it in a podcast once?
I don't know.
I don't know. Anyway,
Our faithful listeners will know. They'll recall.
they'll recall. Well, anyway, so this this book, The Trusted Advisor, is talking about the trust equation, and I've talked about this, or I've heard about it before, in previous jobs and previous roles and stuff like that, where really it's about, and a lot of it too is really geared towards any walk of life, whether you're like a salesperson and you're trying to build that quick trust with somebody to sell them something, right? All the way to, our relationship, or any
To being a
relationship
friend,
with
to being a pastor,
Yeah.
to being a coach, to being a parent.
And what they really say is they talk about credibility, right? So do you have credibility? So if you're a pastor, do you have the expertise, the knowledge? Like if you ran into a pastor and they never read the Bible before, they're not very credible, right? Reliability. Do they do what they
What's
say?
the
Or
say?
consistency.
The old
the
say-do ratio.
Um,
I love when we talk in unison.
I
It's
love
like
it.
harmonious.
It is very harmonious. So that's reliability, and then we have intimacy, which is more like the emotions, like are
Have I let my guard down enough to where you recognize that I'm reciprocating any trust that you're showing?
this is going to be a great conversation, and I was planning on this. Okay,
All right.
so intimacy is a very interesting portion of the trust equation, because you can have oversharers and
Okay.
undershares,
Okay.
right? And an overshare is like you meet somebody and they start talking about their divorce and their ex and how horrible of a person they are, and
Okay.
they're going through all this stuff in your life, and you're like, "Whoa! I just asked how you like the party," right? We've all met overshares before, right? And then you have the undershares, which are like people that you're like begging to try to get something out of. You're like you share
They won't
something with
even-
them, they won't even
They won't
budge.
even share an honest opinion about the weather.
Yeah, I mean, they won't even tell you their middle name, right? Like, they don't want to share anything with you, right? So that both of those, like, fail in that trust, because you don't want an undershare. You don't want to, like, trust them with information on you, but they don't, but that trust isn't reciprocated in my mind.
I think reciprocity.
Reciprocity. Yeah, that's
That's
a word.
a
thing.
word. That's a word I want to use. But with this, the vulnerability. I think it's vulnerability. If I am vulnerable, then I show that I have some trust for you.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Then that communicates that you, in kind, can also potentially have some vulnerability.
True. Very true.
Right? And that can start in small increments. And I think the imbalance that you're speaking of can come sometimes with people who over share, or then people who there's an imbalance between in the relationship of one person is more vulnerable at an earlier stage, and the other person is very reluctant to show any vulnerability at all. It creates an imbalance in the trust equation.
Yeah. So do you think I'm an oversharer or an undersharer? Or middle of the road?
I think you share appropriately.
Do you really? I think I'm an oversharer. I think my wife would say I'm an oversharer. I'll have to ask her.
No, I don't think you have inappropriate levels of sharing. I think I probably have a larger threshold for appropriate sharing.
You respond well, is what you're saying,
Yeah.
to somebody that potentially may be oversharing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
doesn't bother me.
Yeah. It doesn't bother me either.
If I just said, "Whoa, Keith, sorry I was so late getting in here. The hot wings I had were so hot. It created a situation, in
A
my
vortex.
in digest right. Like if I got into like
Yeah,
a lot of people are like, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa,
Did not need to know that. Just
way
apologize
too much,
for being late. And
way
move on.
too much oversharing. Apologize for being late. Whereas
Yeah.
if somebody shares that with me, I'd be like, well, it's a function of humanity. It's a process of being human. We're not in third grade. We don't need to.
I mean, I feel like if somebody shared that with me, I'd be like, what?
What was the flavor
Yeah,
range?
where'd you go?
Yeah.
What was the flavor? So it doesn't happen to me.
So I think we're an adequate level of sharing.
Yeah. So like it would be if somebody came to you and said, "Hey, sorry I'm late. I had some bad sushi last night. Not feeling good." Like you're kind of that's
Yeah,
the
that's fine.
appropriate amount of sharing.
That's fine.
But if they went into what the sushi was and then the effects of said sushi on their digestive system, that's a little oversharing.
Yeah, I'd say public service announcement. Don't get this sushi that's on sale, generally speaking.
Or from a gas station.
Or the special. The special sometimes
It's the old fish.
it could be, especially if it's an interesting fish you've never had before. I'd highly recommend staying away from thinly sliced raw scallop.
Oh, okay. It's hard to get good scallops in the Midwest anyways, so it's hard to get good seafood in the Midwest.
So I had a very poor experience with the scallop special at a sushi restaurant one time. Probably kept me away from sushi for about 6 months.
Well, I don't eat sushi because I'm allergic to fish, so.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, seafood, and then I don't like the texture of regular fish.
Fish and shellfish?
I'm
Like
just
both?
allergic. I'm just allergic to shellfish. I can eat fresh fish, but I don't like the texture. I don't like that flaky. To me, it's mushy.
Yeah, but there's all sorts of ways you can eat it
So
raw.
like a
You can eat it raw
like a nice-
to cooked or
like a
anywhere in
nice
between.
Meaty tuna would be okay. Like not the shredded tuna in a can, but like a tuna fillet or
Yeah.
something like that. I can probably stand that, but not really. My wife's tried like 2 or 3 times in our life to cook something, and and every single time I'm like, no, this isn't happening. So anyway, I will eat, what is it, a California roll that has nothing and it's just vegetables?
Imitation crab meat.
Yeah, well, it's imitation, so it's fine. Like, I eat crab rangoon, love them.
It's whitefish.
Yeah. So anyway, credibility, reliability, intimacy. Your original question to me was, do I feel that you have had an appropriate? I think you're all right. I think that if let's backtrack it for a second. I think that for you, credibility, reliability, intimacy. What's interesting with you, and if our listeners don't know, Mitch does not commit to anything ever. If you invite him to do something,
Keeps my say-do ratio spot on.
If there's any kind of event whatsoever, like if I wasn't married and Mitch and I were best friends, and I'm like, Mitch, I'm getting married, man, I want you to be there. Mitch would be like, I'll see what I can do, but I'm not sure I can make it.
Now, if you invited me to be a groomsman, I'll commit to that.
So I think some people could see that as a reliability issue.
No.
But really, in
I
essence,
don't know.
you are being very reliable in not.
I don't know why that's a reliability issue.
reliable.
I'm trying to prevent a reliability issue.
Yeah, I know. So I think that's the juxtaposition there.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So me, it's credibility. I'm not credible whatsoever.
Well, you're very credible. So we take these things. We take our credibility,
Yep.
our reliability, lack thereof, or whatever. If you could even assign a score, 1 to 5 of those things, right? Mm-hmm. And then the intimacy, the willingness to show that vulnerability. If we add all those things up, so credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, if you think of that as a score, a compounded score, and then we're going to put that over, divided by self-orientation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, tell us about self-orientation.
So self-orientation is how people feel you are in the relationship. So are you one that the relationship's all about you? Then you have a high self-orientation.
Yeah. Are you
right?
self-centered or are you
self-centered.
other-centered?
If you have a low self-orientation, if, in the conversation, somebody tells a story and then you ask further questions about it and you really get into it and wow, that's crazy, whatever. Then you have a low self-orientation. If you then try to one up, it's like, oh, you caught a fish that big. Well, you back in the environment, back in Lake Ontario, I caught this trout, or whatever. Right. Then you have a high self-orientation. That's not good for the trust equation. And I think for me, and you can chime in on this, I think for me, some people feel like I have a high self-orientation because I tend to sometimes relate that way, but it's because I'm trying to relate. It's not that, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So if you tell a story about, I don't know, you oh man, I'm sorry, I was moving this weekend. It was crazy. I moved myself, and I'm like, oh yeah, man, I hate that. We moved ourselves, a couple times, blah, 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 and I'll never do that again. Right. I'm trying to relate.
That's fine.
Yeah, I know. But I think some people can see that as a high self-orientation. So I think I'm probably in the middle if you had to score me,
Yeah. And I think the self-orientation thing too, and maybe I'm, trying to let myself off the hook a little bit with some of it, but I also think it's related to the self-orientation of the other person as well. I think you have to score the self-orientation of others based on your own personal self-orientation. Mm-hmm. Because if someone, and that can also play in there too with just personality and how outgoing and how engaging folks are. Because if you talk about, I like good cohesion in groups, and I like conversation. I like And I don't have to be the center of it or lead it or push it or direct it. I just like that it happens because I feel like life's better in relationship, and a relationship isn't sitting around staring at your phone, right?
Sure.
So it's like, to your point, if someone's like, "Oh man, you're in a group, 4 or 5 people, so it's a horrible weekend and moved herself," and and if you're there and you jump right back in with, "Yeah, I've moved myself too," and
so you like the
I'd be like,
interaction.
all right, it's all good. We're good here.
yeah.
We've got at that point, I would have a low self-orientation because then the conversation's happening, and then I can be empathetic, be like, "Oh, where'd you move to?" What? Right? Because now we've got.
Oh, you still live? You're not living on such and such street anymore? Where'd you move?
Yeah, but if it would have just been crickets, I think the icebreaker of, I've done that, right? Some relatability.
Okay.
Anyway, I think in the art of conversation, I think can determine. I think you have to really be careful with assigning self-orientation skills, or not skills, self-orientation levels to people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm with you.
I want to have grace and mercy when pointing out someone's high self-orientation score.
Well, I also think this kind of relates to, although it doesn't relate necessarily to trust. In relationships, I look at it as takers and givers, right? And sometimes people are equal; they both take and give, right? Sometimes people take a little bit more than they give, but sometimes people give a little bit more than they take. And I usually find if you line up friends, like best friends, or you line up, couples, if they're both like equal, like maybe a little giver, a little taker, that's okay. In between, that's okay. What I always find is the people that are both takers, right? Not the opposite, but both takers is very weird to me. And I look at that from, now I'm relating this back to self-orientation. If you're in that group and people are talking and you've got like the whole group is just 2 people talking back and forth the whole time, then that also becomes a little awkward.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, even though that's maybe just who they are, they're both 2 high self-oriented people. That's when you like just kind of take your cup of iced tea and you kind of turn around and you make a subgroup within the people.
Oh yeah,
right. Anyway, I just thought that was funny.
We're gonna have.
You guys are having a great conversation. We're gonna go over here.
Well, see you later. Big gulps, huh?
Well, that's it. That's all the time.
Yeah,
we
we're
ran
out of time. I know.
It was great.
Sorry
I
about
had like
that.
16 other things to talk about.
I know. This was a good one. I like talking about this trust. Because I feel we can roll up in here and I just really trust that it's going to work out just fine.
And if not, there's always next week.
Yeah.
And speaking of that,
self-oriented enough, we'll fill the air.
see you next week.
Have a good one.
Bye.